So our next speaker is Jennifer Kamau. Jennifer, I'm very glad you're here today. Jennifer Kamau is one of the founders of International Women's Space. And International Women's Space is a feminist, anti-racist political group in Berlin with migrant and refugee women and non-migrant women as members. They fight patriarchy and document everyday violence, racism, sexism, and all kinds of discrimination. International Women's Space was formed in December 2012 during the refugee movement's occupation of the former Gerhard Hauptmann Schule in Berlin-Kreuzberg. They created the women's space there, which remained open until the summer of 2014. They worked to form a women's front within the refugee movement that brings the fights against both racism and sexism together. After the eviction of the school, International Women's Space continued working with new members joining them. In 2017, they founded a registered association. Jennifer Kamau will talk about the topic of our conference from a power critical perspective and ask the question, are we vulnerable or are we made vulnerable? Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. I'm very glad to be here, and at least I've listened to the two, panels that were there before, and it's very interesting work that everybody is doing. And Sylvia's Agnes approach of vulnerability was also quite interesting for me because it brings about my critical point of this aspect of vulnerability. And just to add on to what Sylvia mentioned is that everybody at some point is vulnerable, and but there is an aspect of vulnerability that I would like to bring into perspective. The aspect of the whole of the asylum system, the aspect of racism in the context of this vulnerability, and why I think at some point we are made vulnerable. We are not vulnerable, but we are made vulnerable. And I will start by talking about shortly, just very briefly, about the whole asylum system, which, if you look at the living conditions, like most of the panelists have mentioned, are very deplorable. And the living conditions are where most of these people are living are centers which were barracks or army fields or war-based areas, which for a long time, nothing much was done to improve the structures of these spaces. And so definitely the conditions are wanting. And there's also the aspect of why to keep people in homes, while it's more cheaper to have people in apartments. And there has been a lot of research which has been done on that topic, because when you look at the situations of the home, they have to share common amenities like the toilet and the bathroom and the kitchen. And when you look at all the cost of running these centers, it's cheaper to keep people out of the home. But it's for a reason why people are kept together for the purposes of being made vulnerable. That's my first argument of this aspect of vulnerability. And the conditions become so bad that it manifests when people live together in a small space for a long period of time. The conflicts become like a normal day. They become like a norm because the spaces are not enough. People are congested. People are trying to get their own space. People are trying to breed. And with this state of living, of course, it breeds a very good situation for conflicts within the people living in these spaces. And the aspect of criminalizing people who are living in these structures comes in. So whenever there is an aspect of conflicts within the home, bearing in mind, first of all, that the Heim is a place where people live together. People have come from different parts of the world with different socializations and cultures. And when you close them together, there is so much reason to clash because of the cultures, because of the beliefs, because of the socialization, because of the stress of through the asylum system. So it becomes a breeding place for violence. And once situations of certain situations are, for example, violence is experienced in the Heim, then the police are called. And this is the first instance of creating the notion or feeding this narrative that the people living in the Heims are criminals, or they are violent, or they are not human beings. So the surrounding, the neighborhood begins to feed into these narratives that these people are very bad people. These people are not are violent because of the constant, because of these constant conflicts that come within keeping people in a closed shelter. So that is one aspect of the state through the asylum system and the housing accommodation facilities, putting people in a vulnerable situation to the society. And then this narrative prolongs for such a long time that to change it has become it has become very difficult. But then with every concept of vulnerability, it is a failure by the state to provide the basic human needs for the people that are being spoken about. So that is just one aspect. And then I can remember in the time when we were talking about we were fighting about the residents fleeched and the voucher system, which was abolished some years ago. The dehumanizing of the whole person, even when they go to the supermarket with a voucher, and these vouchers were usually of different denominations, and you had to count. So if you had to buy commodities of 20 euros, you had to make a calculation in the supermarket that fitted in that denomination of that voucher. So the society outside does not understand why you're making that calculation. So they begin to see symptoms or signs of a person who is crazy, because you're busy making the calculations. Because for the bare fact that if you bought commodities that costed 18 euros and you had a voucher of 20 euros, the person at the counter was not supposed to give you back the difference of the 2 euros. So these calculations were necessary. So that is the first aspect of how the society and the people applying for asylum are made to start creating differences in the sense that the society begins to look at people living in the shelters as inhuman, or in a very different context. And as we continue, the whole of the asylum system is very racist. And with the racism, you find that when you're inside the whole of the asylum system, you're not able to evaluate what is your right and what what is rightfully yours, or what is supposed to be accorded to you as a right, and what is being denied to you. So you cannot differentiate what is your right and what is being denied that is part of your right. So the society creates very vulnerable people, and then it tortures them until when it wants to save them. And in this process is by simply denying, or it's actually denying the basic human needs of the people. And I can continue further to explain in the context of, for example, the Dublin regulation. The Dublin regulation dictates that once you're registered in one country, one European country, the country is responsible for you. So what happens when you enter a first European country and the living conditions of these countries are not habitable? For example, Malta, Italy, or Greece. And we all know how much overwhelmed these places are with asylum seekers. So you are forced to migrate to the next European country where you will find a little bit better living conditions. Then what happens? The minute you enter another European country, you have no right to apply for asylum. So what happens is that because of the Dublin regulation, it is kicking people out of even the asylum procedure. So you find you enter the asylum procedure, they detect that you have been a Dublin case, and then you are under deportation. So the minute you acknowledge you're under deportation, you leave the system and have to live undocumented. And it's on this process of being pushed to become undocumented that I really want to stress the point of where people are made vulnerable. So the system cannot accommodate you because of a regulation which was made without the European Union not putting into consideration the basic living conditions of people entering inside the European Union, which means all these entry points, which we all know the basic living conditions are deplorable, is something the European Union refused to discuss what is basically needed for people to survive in those centers. So the failure of them not providing what is duly needed is what pushes people to come further, or maybe there are other reasons. So you enter, for example, you enter Germany, and for certain reasons, then they find your fingerprints in the database, and then you're forced to, how people are saving themselves, because they're saying it's saving yourself, you have to get out of the asylum system for 18 months. Now, for 18 months, you are a very new person in that country. Probably you know only one person, or you don't even know anybody. How are you supposed to survive in a country that you don't even understand what happens in that country? And the state has made, you have escaped war, you have escaped whatever reasons that have made you leave your country. And you have entered the second European country. Then in that same country you enter, then you are forced out of the only possibility to make sure that you're provided for as you apply for your asylum system. This is where the situation has made people completely vulnerable, in the sense that once you are undocumented, you have nothing, you have no basic. And if you have any basic, it's something that alternative groups are self-organizing to provide. And in the process of these provisions, it's something that is not even sustainable. And the people in the society are kept very busy trying to organize to support the people coming in because of certain reasons. And this is where I would want them to question why is the state keeping people very busy organizing for what the state is failing to do. So once you're illegalized, then you have no basic, you look for alternative sleeping shelters here and then, or then you're forced to practice prostitution. For one, so that you can have a place to sleep, or you have food to eat. Second, if you get a job, you will only work with the terms that are not favorable for you. And with that aspect of being illegalized, that is the most detrimental point of someone being dehumanized, completely taken off your dignity, because then you are left completely bare. You are left completely predisposed to situations that the state has failed to provide. And then we come to the aspect of a situation where, for example, a woman is seeking asylum and she is in a family unit. And they probably left their country because of war. And as they migrated, this woman within this family unit has been experiencing violence from her husband, who, with the asylum procedure, he's usually the head of the family because he's the oldest. And then there's no information that this woman gets in terms of gender-based violence and the protection that she would independently, the information she would need to independently apply for her asylum separate from the family unit without causing, without creating more problems. And you find then organizations are really busy trying to work on all this information to reach a woman who probably it is even too late, or she's too abused by the partner in the whole of the asylum process, that even to reverse the whole role of the whole asylum application becomes very difficult, because it has gone too far, and within the stipulated time of law, someone is supposed to either make an appeal or make a second case application. By the time this information is reaching this woman, it has already surpassed the time limit that she's allowed to go back and apply a different way. And there's also situations of women who just the bare fact that a woman enters this country with a child, then there's an aspect of the first person that is usually seen is the child. So the needs of the woman are not separated from the needs of the child. So it's usually the child, the issues of the child which are addressed. The issues of the woman are never even addressed, because then it's the women and children, but it's usually the children. So you find the sacrifices the women have to make because of the children that they come with, even though here, being a first world, the structures are there to support without putting someone in a vulnerable situation. Okay. The other aspect of vulnerability I would like to speak about is that people flee from our countries to come here. The issue is that there are the reasons why people are fleeing from our countries. And we flee for a very wide variety. Now there's even going to be the climate refugees, which will also be difficult to prove that you're a climate refugee. But the reasons as to why people flee are not addressed. Because if these reasons are addressed, then for sure, this would curb the incoming of, or the influx of people migrating. And these reasons are, as we all know, or if maybe I should just go through them again, is the war, the weapon industries that have to manufacture wars in our countries, unfair trades, that whenever we have trade with European countries, then it has to come in forms of exploitation. And when we think about that, all the food or anything we wear in this country has been made from the third world countries, should there have been proper and fair compensation of the labor that has been the labor force for the commodities that people are using, for sure people would not migrate. But because this is a continuation of neocolonialism, then people talk around all the other problems of people fleeing, but people don't address the reasons as to why people are fleeing. So I'm going to give an example of the Golitsa Park. The Golitsa Park is very, very well known for drugs. And with this park, you will find young men of between 15, very young people. Maybe they're in the, let me just say between 17 and I don't know which age. It can range from whatever age, but it starts from 17. And these young people mostly have come through the Mediterranean. So they have survived. They have survived. And at that point, they were not called vulnerable. But when they come here, they are made vulnerable in this aspect. These are people who are saying very clearly that we are economic refugees. There is exploitation in our country. There is dictatorships in our country. There is all these problems you're facing in our country, which these problems that we are all facing in our country are intertwined with Europe or America. There's something to do with something. And they're saying we are the economic refugees. But is there a possibility for economic refugees to get asylum? No, it's not a possibility. So what happens? They are able to infiltrate the country through the Dublin regulations, and most of them are actually in the Dublin regulation, these 18 months where everybody has to how do I put it? To save yourself, this 18 months of saving yourself, where you have nothing, you have no provisions, where you cannot work, where you have nothing. And so the state pushes you into the park. And once you are in the park, the narrative of the Black and the Muslim man being the criminal is projected by what we see from the park. But the reasons to why those people are in the park is never addressed. And when we look at the demography of Germany and how much people are needed to run the economy of capitalism, and the need for labor, you just don't understand why these people are not being they're not being accepted into the system and trained into the trainings that the state requires. So what happens? The people are peddling drugs there, and this is what is usually in the news. But my question is, where is the face of the drug baron? Where is the face of the consumer? Because it's a business. It's a complete business. There's a demand and supply, and there cannot be a supply if there's no. It's a whole chain of demand and supply. But if we keep projecting the face of crime to be the Black or the Muslim person, without questioning the responsibility or the challenges behind, or the political situation behind people being put in a park like that, then we are failing. There's a very clear failure of everybody in terms of not questioning what is supposed to be questioned. I had the privilege of watching this before watching this, I would like to say I was part of the Oranienplatz movement. And when the time came for eviction, that was in 2014, there was the whole state, police were asked from whichever states of Germany, and in front of Gerd Hauptmannschule, there was 1,000 policemen. And it was not very difficult to evacuate the school, even though some people remained because they were in a building. If the state was serious about finishing this people, I mean, getting rid of the drug business at the parks, this would not be a very difficult thing. If they deployed the police that they did, like for example, from the school, this would not be a difficult thing. But the drug industry has its own politics. They're not interested in finishing this industry. The whole politics of the drug industry is something that people need to bring into the forefront. This discourse is something people need to discuss about. And why I am so passionate about this talk is that I had the privilege of watching the Kinder von Bahnhof Zoo. And this was sometimes, I think, in the 80s or in the 70s. My question is, who was selling drugs in that time in Germany? Because I didn't see any Black people peddling drugs in that time. Which means the drug industry has been running for a very long time. But because we want to criminalize a certain society, as we have to, because of racism, and we want to project hate towards certain people, we have to drive into that narrative of criminals, of uncivilized people, of people who are coming to only bring problems to our country. So the whole of the political discourse around the refugees and the refugee crisis and what the state is doing to the people is something that we need to question. The people who are coming here to apply for asylum in 10, 20 years, in 10 years, they will be part of this society. And when they become part of this society, the trauma that they will have, they are going through the asylum system is something that will never leave them forever in their minds. And then you will ask how people get radicalized in later years when you don't address some of these situations that people are facing through the asylum now. The issue of vulnerability, and someone talked about here social workers being overwhelmed. Whenever there is a situation of vulnerability, a crisis of vulnerability, or people being overwhelmed, the social work, behind it is always the failure by the state to do the work it's supposed to do. It is always that way. And I'm not saying people can, we are all vulnerable at whatever time. Even you as a European, when you leave this country and go to another foreign country with all the resources that you have, you're already vulnerable by the fact that, by the bare fact of being in a foreign land. Then what do you expect from someone who is fleeing, not leaving their country voluntarily, and fleeing to a country that they anticipate to get protection? And then the protection they hope for does not even come. And then the state has turned it that you have to, they have used this vulnerability that in order to be protected, you have to fit in a certain clause so that then you get the resources that are required. So the aspect of vulnerability is something that is being used to make people fit in certain, I would still say boxes, that if you don't fit in that, then you don't get what you need, because then you're not vulnerable. I don't know if I have said enough, but I would really want to engage the people inside for, I mean, I would really like to get questions, because I know people have many questions.
Well, we have one question now. Someone wants to ask a question, and maybe afterwards we can listen to one of the audios. if there are no more questions. So the question is by Uta Hausmann from Refugios Stuttgart.
Hello, Jennifer. Thank you very much. I was very impressed because you highlighted some issues that I know from, debating with human rights activists worldwide, but which are not so much highlighted in our own discussion, especially the aspects of undocumented migrants, but also what I find very important, how strong there's a link between vulnerability and criminalization that you highlighted. I think that that's quite important, and I would be interested. I mean, you talked about it mainly with the drug issue, like as an example, but do you see other aspects, like for example, in organizing amongst refugees? How do you see how much freedom is there to actually really get organized and empower yourself as a group or a movement that wants to be heard within Germany? I mean, do you feel that there's freedom, or is there also aspects of criminalization that you see? For example, how could we hear the voices of undocumented migrants better if they can't really show their faces? How can we go about this?
There's already a group of women organizing called Legalisierung Jetzt. And of course, it poses a lot of challenges because they cannot project their faces. And it's also very hard to organize here as an IFAO, as an organization, if you're not registered. Where do you get the funding from? If, for example, if you take an example of the documented people and the undocumented, they have no basics. How are they supposed to even sustain themselves in the process of these organizations? It's the same thing that people are doing. All the people who are working on self-organized groups, really, they live actually from hand to mouth, because it becomes a full-time job to do the advocacy work to the point that the effect is felt. So this is a challenge I would pose to anybody. Look around for those small groups that are starting and see what they need in terms of what they need in order to be effective in the advocacy work that they are doing.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I think as there are no more questions, maybe we can at least see one of is it an audio or a video?
It's an audio.
So we can maybe at least hear one of the audios that you brought.
Hello everyone, I'm reporting from Dubai location, and I'll start with the current corona situation. So far we have recorded one case of corona, and the guy who tested positive is put on isolation, and people who were in contact with him, there was a follow-up, and they are also in self-quarantine. Now the measures are taken very well. There is wearing of masks, especially in public gatherings. They've also introduced checking of temperature at the gate when you're going out, when you're coming in. There's also washing hands, which is mandatory now, under the supervision of a social worker on duty. Now, so many things have been closed, like gym, and avoiding so much of public gathering due to the corona case. Now, the quarantine is still for 2 days. When you stay outside for more than 48 hours, you're being quarantined. There's also a new law in Dubalog that when you stay for more than 7 days outside the camp, then you have to start again your process again in Eisenhüttenstadt. Now that's a new law that has come up, and the notices are being pinged everywhere. Now the next thing that I'm going to talk about is deportations. Now the deportations, it's like they've been put on hold for the last 1 month now. I've been in Dubalog for 2 months, and 3 cases of deportations have happened. That is one from the first one was from France, that they came in 2 buses. The first bus was full of people from Arab community. From a reliable source, they were picked up from different hands. The other bus was empty, and they managed to get one guy from Kenya, took him back to France. Everything managed, and he came and started his way. He managed to come back, and he started his process again in Eisenhüttenstadt. Now the other one was from Sweden, a family that had gotten their transfer, and the morning of their transfer, that is early 6 o'clock, they being deported. The police came, they were being deported. The other one was, I'm not sure from which country, but it was from Arab community. Now, the other thing that I'm going to talk about is about the transfers. So far, the transfers are on hold because of the corona case. But before the corona case, the transfers were being done very well. Like 10 people would get transferred on each and every week, and that was good. Now, because of those transfers, Dubalog has become so deserted because the number of people entering Dubalog has decreased. Now, people coming from Eisenhüttenstadt, the number is decreasing day by day. That means Dubalog is deserted. Like, for example, in our building, that is the family building, it's a 5-story building, and 5th floor, 4th floor, and 3rd floor is totally deserted. They are totally deserted. Now, everybody was being put in 1st and 2nd floor, not sharing the rooms. Everybody has their own room. Now, there's also another concern about people in the camp. Since Dubalog is a deportation camp, there's a lot of stress there. There's a lot of depression, especially with women. And one case we have is a girl of 20 years. And that girl is so depressed. She does not know what to do. She does not know who to turn to. Then the whole thing is being covered up. She's doing some things, and instead of finding a way out to her problem, a solution to her problem, they call police. They inject her to calm down. Then they took her for an overnight, and then brought her back in the following day in the morning. There's also another girl also who is also in Dubalog, and she is also now engaging herself in heavy drinking because of depression. So that means that people in the camp are getting depressed, especially now in Dubalog. Since everybody has that mentality, it is a deportation camp. So I don't know what can be done. Maybe a follow-up, a mentorship, just to talk to people about how they can manage their stress and depression. Now, that's all I have to report. Thank you for listening.
There's a lot to pick from that audio, because that one was for October. And before there was that order, there was a lot of work that was done before the right information reached the people in the Heim. But the pointer is that people who are living in these shelters are very depressed. They're turning to alcoholism. They're having mental problems. Instead of getting the help they need, they face violence. They face state violence, actually. And these are the people in 5 years that will be part of this society. Because at some point, if you look at the data, how much the number of people that after applying for asylum are able to integrate into the society and get the right Aufenthalt status. But these are the people who are going to be part of this society. So the question is, are we aware what kind of a society we are preparing ourselves for?